and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.
Hello, Philippines. This is LeCain with World News Jam. We bring you the most interesting stories from around the world each week. We just don't give you the news, but we tell you the story behind the news, as well as read and answer your questions in an entertaining and easy to understand way. So please join us on DZRJ 810 AM Radio Bandito TV and get yourself updated with all the interesting news of the week from around the world right here on DZRJ's World News Jam.
Watch and listen to World News Jam, Saturdays, 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. Airing on Sky Cable Channel 224 and on all DTT boxes. Simulcasting online on Facebook and YouTube. Listen and watch on your mobile devices. Just search DZRJ Radio Bandido.
Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam right here on Radio Bandito TV and, of course, DZRJ Radio 810 AM on your radio dial. My name is LeCain. We bring you interesting stories from outside the Philippines so you can stay informed and be and sound smart to all of your friends. Now, this week we will be looking at the U.S. presidential debate and the fallout from that. What happened in Israel, and can it get any worse? What scary things is North Korea doing these days? The iPhone 16 is out, but is it worth it? Some space news and much, much more. But first, I just wanted to mention something that I have been watching develop for a while and just wanted to discuss it for a bit. You know, NATO, the Northern Atlantic Treaty Organization, where a bunch of European countries got together along with the United States to say, let's join up and create one military against Russia. Now, since that started, NATO has expanded its efforts, and it has proven a very effective group. Because, you know, one country against the giant that is Russia is one thing, but getting everyone to fight alongside each other kind of evens the score, don't you think? So I wonder if we should make one of those for Asia, maybe the Pacific Asian Treaty Organization, or APTO. All the Asian nations would come together to make a military against China. Why? Because like Russia, China seems to be the one country in Asia which is a threat to all. This past week, a lot has happened between China and the Philippines. I mean, if you have been following the news over the past month, a lot has happened between those two countries. It's gotten to the point where China finally told the Philippines that it needs to seriously consider the future of its relationship with China. The two countries are currently at a crossroads. This came out in the People's Daily, the newspaper of the governing Communist Party of China. There have been many incidents in the past month with Coast Guard vessels ramming each other. It only seems to be escalating. And since all these incidents, the discussion about how to improve relations is just sitting on the fence, waiting for the other to make a move, to come talk to them. The article said, China-Philippines relations stand at a crossroads, facing a choice of which way to go. Dialogue and consultation is the right path, as there is no way out of the conflict through confrontation. The article goes on that Manila should seriously consider the future of China-Philippine relations and to work with China to push bilateral relations back on track. But what should Manila do? There really is no middle ground. China is not going to give up its claim to the ocean. As I said in a recent show, $3 trillion passes through that area annually, and who knows what's underneath the sea. According to all the science reports I have read, for sure, it's something big. Big like a Qatarian gas field big? Maybe. But even though the current president of the Philippines is trying his best to stand strong, there's no way he can do it alone. Chinese generals said that we, the Chinese People Liberation Army, will resolutely crush any foreign hostile encroachment on Chinese territorial, sovereign, and maritime rights and interests with firm determination, staunch will, strong capability, and effective means. But in the same week, China said it still wants to be friends. Philippines looks this week in its meetings to be staying firm on its position in the disputed parts of the ocean, but says it's opening to lowering the tension. But how can this ever happen if China refuses to give up these parts of the ocean? That's not really theirs. Well, eventually we need to have an Asian NATO, the APTO, just to keep China at bay. And what would China do if everyone, including the United States, started a club without them? There are so many factors to consider before moving to that point, but Europe did it, and it turned out to be a pretty good idea. I'm just saying. This is 𝗪cie𝗿𝗀 on the World News Jam on Radio Bandito TV, bringing the most interesting stories from around the world. Speaking of starting APTO, where has North Korea been lately? Well, it turns out doing the same thing it always does, shooting missiles into the ocean. This week, North Korea fired off one of those short-range ballistic missiles. The missile that was fired off its east coast went around 360 kilometers before plunging into the sea. The Americans immediately condemned the launch as a clear provocation that seriously threatens peace and stability on the Korean peninsula. Soon after, the Japanese also condemned the launch and lodged a protest against North Korea. According to the U.S., Japan, and South Korea, there was a clear violation of the UN resolutions, and they said they will respond. So everything is just normal business as usual with North Korea. Last time we heard from North Korea was on July 1st, when they claimed to have had a successful test of a tactical ballistic missile capable of carrying 4.5-ton super large warheads. Although the president checked out his new upgraded 240-millimeter rocket launcher, his suicide drones, and called for a development of artificial intelligence for unmanned military vehicles. But as far as what happened this week, there may be a bit more than just checking the guns and launching a missile. Also this week, North Korea celebrated its 76th anniversary of being a country. It was September 9th, 1948, when North Korea established the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. This came after the Japanese were defeated. The Russians held the northern part of Korea and the U.S. the southern. The U.S. and the Russians couldn't agree on how to put Korea back together, so instead they drew a line down the middle, along the 38th parallel. The Russians on the north, U.S. on the south, each side claiming to be the true legitimate government of Korea. So, after all the white people finally left, Korea could still not come together on who was supposed to be the leader. So instead they had a war. But unfortunately, no one could win the war. So instead of a line down the middle, they created a demilitarized zone, each side taking very different roads. The North having its leader, Kim Il-sung, taking a path of having a kind of personality cult where the leader decides every part of your life. However, with the fall of the Soviet Union and several natural disasters, North Korea went into an economic crisis in which it was never able to recover. His son, Kim Jong-il, eventually took over, and then later his son, Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un gave a speech this week in celebration of the birth of its republic. The speech was cheered by the public. Of course, if you don't cheer there, you may be sent to prison. But the subject of the speech made a lot of heads outside the country bobble around and go, oh no, what does this mean? You see, Kim Jong-un vowed to redouble his country's efforts to make his nuclear weapons to be fully ready to be used in a moment's notice. I don't know what you're saying. Kim has made threats like this before, and there's has always been no evidence that he can actually do what he says. But now experts believe that something very scary is about to happen, such as a missile test like we have not seen in the past. It looks like maybe a new long-range missile test around that time of the U.S. election. Kim said North Korea now faces a grave threat because of what he calls a reckless expansion of a U.S.-led regional military bloc that is now developing into a nuclear-based one. He said such a development is pushing North Korea to boost its military capability And for this, he's going to redouble his efforts to have his nuclear force ready for combat. Kim seems to have in his head that the U.S. is on the verge of invading his country. This comes in part to signing a new defense guideline between the U.S. and South Korea, in which they plan to integrate the U.S.'s nuclear weapons program with South Korea's conventional weapons. So, what Kim interprets this as is a preparation to take over his country. And these drills that the U.S. and South Korea did last month, well, it's not really helping the situation. North Korea keeps calling these drills invasion rehearsals. And if using these drills is an excuse for doing this uptick in nuclear war preparation, of course the U.S. hasn't had to worry so much before because North Korea really doesn't have all the answers it needs to get a missile with a nuclear payload from one side of the world to the other. But then there's this picture of a 12-axle missile launch vehicle. What is that for? What would they need something that big for? Not the Hwasong-17 ICM that takes an 11-axle platform. Meanwhile, North Korea is also flying balloons over South Korea filled with garbage. What kind of garbage? Well, waste papers and vinyl. Articles printed with Hello Kitty characters. But also the clothes donated from South Korea for the people of the North, which they have all cut up. But also some of the balloons contain feces and parasites. So the public has been asked not to touch the balloons and just let the military handle it for now. Many believe that North Korea got this balloon idea from the South, who was doing the same thing, but instead filling the balloons with anti-North Korean propaganda. This is something that makes North Korea very mad, as they are trying very hard to make sure that the foreign news doesn't get anywhere near its 26 million citizens. It's very, very important that no one in North Korea ever sees what life is like in the South, much less the rest of the world. The people of the North must continue to believe that the rest of the world lives in the same type of situation that they do, or even worse. If the public in North Korea ever knew that food and water was so plentiful, that people own cars and work in high-rise buildings and have more than a few pieces of clothing, can pick their own school, can go to their own job, their own wife, their own husband? What would happen in North Korea if its citizens saw that? Right now, no one tries to escape because if you make it out alive, your whole family could be in prison or executed. So for now, we can only guess what Kim Jong-un is thinking and why his plans are what they are and why. I mean, if Kim would lay down his arms and promise that he will give up his quest for long-range nuclear missiles, then his country would give its people a happy and secure life. But it looks like that is not going to be happening anytime soon. Instead, everyone is ramping up its nuclear programs to fend off what it thinks the other is planning. On the one side, the U.S. and South Korea will combine nuclear weapons with traditional weapons, and on the other side, North Korea will get its nuclear weapons ready to fire at a moment's notice. And in the middle of all this, its citizens going to work, raising its children, and just hoping nobody shoots. This is LeCain here on The Jam on DZRJ Radio. Let's take a look at what happened in Israel in the past few days. You know, the U.S. is currently not happy with Israel. This week they attacked a group of protesters. The group called the International Solidarity Movement had what they call a peaceful protest against the Israeli attacks on the people of Palestine. Now, this attack by the Israelis did not happen in Gaza. Remember on last week's show, we learned that Israel is stepping up its attacks in the West Bank, and this is where that protest was. The West Bank has an extreme uptick in violence this past several weeks. We talked about that major attack in the West Bank last week from the Israeli military, which called it a preemptive strike because it claims that there were terrorists hiding in the West Bank planning on attacking Israel very soon. The reason the Americans are so mad now that the Israelis, first off, they fired on a group of protesters with no weapons. And second, there was an American among them, a 26-year-old girl, and she was killed. Now, according to reports, she was killed by an Israeli sniper. However, the shot that killed her was, according to Israel, unintentional. Of course, after hearing that, from the Israeli government, the parents of that girl said, a sniper killing you from hundreds of meters away is not unintentional. It can't be. The U.S. Secretary of State has called for fundamental changes to the way Israel carries out its missions in the West Bank. He also is very skeptical as to the reason the American girl was killed. At the news conference in London, the Secretary of State called it unprovoked and unjustified and has demanded changes to the rules of engagement of the Israeli forces. He said no one should be shot and killed for attending a protest. No one should have to put their life at risk just for expressing their views. He goes on, now we have a second American citizen killed at the hands of Israeli security forces. It's not acceptable, has to change. And we'll be making that clear to the senior-most members of the Israeli government. Now, I believe the other American he is talking about is that guy, 𝗪cie𝗶𝗱𝗀, who we talked about here on the show before. He was the aid worker who was with the World Central Kitchen. He was dropping off food for groups of starving Palestinians. They told the Israel forces every move they were making. However, Israel attacked them anyway. And even though they surrendered, the military kept shooting until everyone in the convoy was dead. The Israeli military said they did an investigation and that it was a tragic accident. The thing about these killings is that they are, in the words of Americans, simply swept under the rug. In other words, the Israeli military kills with impunity with no worry of repercussion. Back in 2003, an American girl was protesting the demolition of Palestinian homes in Gaza, and an Israeli in a bulldozer provided by the U.S. ran over her, crushing her to death. The Israeli military ruled it a tragic accident and dropped all cases. Her father claimed Israel doesn't do investigations, they only do cover-ups. Now, the girl that was killed last week, 𝗪cie𝗶𝗱𝗀, was protesting the illegal settlements in the West Bank. What makes many people so angry is that when people protest Israeli settlements, which are deemed by the UN as illegal anyway, they are attacked by the military. However, if someone from one of the settlements commits violence on a Palestinian, the military just looks the other way. There's reports after reports of this happening in the West Bank on a daily basis. When the report came out that the Israeli military about the death of 𝗪cie𝗶𝗱𝗀, it said that it is highly likely that she was hit indirectly and unintentionally by Israeli army fire, which was not aimed at her, but aimed at the key instigator of the riot. Now, as I said before, few people believe a sniper could accidentally make a kill like this unintentionally. But will it ever be fully investigated by the Israeli military? In fact, when they were first asked about it, they refused to even admit that it was an Israeli sniper, but then they couldn't continue in that line because who else was out there firing at people? Just the Israeli military. Just last month, a teacher from New Jersey was shot in the leg protesting Israeli settlements in the West. He said, the money I pay taxes as a teacher probably funded the bullet that they have run through my leg. Note that the day after he was shot, the U.S. approved the sale of $20 billion of military equipment to Israel. The question being asked now is that if Israel will not only kill Palestinians who have nothing to do with the war in Hamas, they will also kill Americans who are siding with them. And while this is all the while American government continues to finance the Israeli military with billions of dollars in weapons, are these weapons for defense or are they for the expansion of its occupation and to continue with its ongoing plans to rid the world of a race of people? In a related story, Israeli military bombed the United Nations Al-Juna school in central Gaza this week. They killed 18 people. Witnesses say women and children were literally blown to pieces. Now, there is a problem of where to house the people that escaped. This is supposed to be a safe place. And yet the Israelis bombed it anyway. The The military investigation said that they heard about Hamas terrorist operatives in the building. The UNRWA said that they were currently not able to determine if any Hamas were in the building and repeatedly called for an investigation. Then, without providing evidence, a spokesman for the Israeli military said the building was no longer a school, that now it was a legitimate target for the military as it was being used by Hamas. By the way, this building housed 12,000 displaced Palestinian civilians. Since the war, nearly 190 UNRWA facilities have been hit in 435 separate incidences. Remember, when I said the U.S. was sending its aircraft carriers to Israel when Israel thought that Iran and Hezbollah were planning an attack, well, that ship has turned around and is heading back to the United States. In a message from the U.S. military analyst, the U.S. will not accommodate Prime Minister Netanyahu to continue this endless war. It seems as if the U.S. was there to assist Israel with the defense of its country. However, it just doesn't have the stomach anymore for seeing people not related to the war being killed. Hamas targeted civilians in its initial attack, but the U.S. doesn't support Hamas. They support Israel. And now that Israel is targeting civilians, and it seems that the initial point of the war, according to the U.S., well, it's being lost. This is Eric LeCain on the World News Jam. I'm talking about news stories from around the world. Let's take a look at tech news this week. Now, the biggest question going around the world we need to ask ourselves is, do I need an iPhone 16, which was just released this week? The answer, of course, is of course you do, just like you needed the iPhone 15 and the 14 and the 13 and the 12. Even though all you use is TikTok and FB Messenger and, the camera on occasion. But in any case, let's take a look at the amazing features of this phone that you can't or can live without. Now, there are 4 versions of the phone, just like in previous models: the iPhone 16, the iPhone 16 Plus, the 16 Pro, the 16 Pro Max. Prices are starting at $799, going up to $1,599 for the super decked out Pro Max. Philippine pricing should be out soon. So the pricing is really no surprise, just follows what they have always done. But the one thing I find interesting is the size. They have an iPhone that is 6.9 inches. In other words, we're getting close to tablet-sized phones. So they will have to make pants to fit your phone instead of a phone to fit your pants. Also, something that is impressive is the ceramic shield for the display. It's supposed to be 50% tougher. I used to think they designed the iPhone screen to easily break, or else who would they sell their replacement screens to? But maybe this screen is really better. So if anyone out there wants to buy a new iPhone 16 and then drop it, you can let us know if the screen breaks. Now, the iPhone comes with a new A18 chip, which can support new Apple Intelligence, although it seems we will have to wait several months for the actual software. I guess they want to make sure it all works correctly first, but in any case, the CPU is supposed to be 30% faster and the graphics 40% faster. So if you play a lot of high-end video games, this is great for you. I don't play video games, so I will just be able to say, hey, my phone is faster than yours. Now, for some of the usable features, first of all, who hates moving your finger over the top of an app and opening it? Who knows, you might eventually develop carpal tunnel syndrome of the finger. But now you have the action button. It's a button you assign to open whatever app you want. For instance, if you need to get on TikTok a quarter of a second faster than normal, this button is great for you. But actually, if I could use it to go to the Tagalog translator while a person at the table is saying something about me, that would be very handy. And what about those times when you need to get a picture of your neighbor who's stealing mangoes from across the fence on your tree, but you're fumbling around to try and get the phone out of your pocket and put in your password and open the app just as he's already gone? But now you have the camera control button. Just take out your phone and boom, you're taking pictures. You can even set styles on the fly by just moving your finger across the button. You can zoom in and out just by moving your finger lightly across the top. Now it also has its way to set the, oh my God, manual focus. They spent decades developing phones to have faster and better autofocus, and now they're bringing back manual focus on the iPhone 16. Also, with the new OS 18, you just point the camera to something and it will tell you what it's all about, what the thing you're looking at. For instance, you point the camera at a restaurant, it'll tell you what's on the menu or what time it closes. If you point it at a dog, it'll tell you what kind of breed that dog is. I wonder if Ascal is one of the breeds on the iPhone. But one thing that's interesting is that when recording video, it does 4K at 120 frames per second. You know what that means? Super ridiculous slow motion. Dropping a water balloon on someone's head can be remembered so much better if you can see every drop of water bouncing off their noggin. And lastly, the battery is supposed to be longer. Something that makes us all smile. And it's supposed to be less hotter, which makes me feel much safer when the giant 6.9-inch piece of tech is in my pocket near my most valuable assets. So, do I need an iPhone 16 or do I just want one? Especially coming from the generation where we didn't grow up with iPhones and somehow still survived. I guess it will come down to how many pesos I can force myself to spend on something like this. But speaking of spending pesos on a phone, have you seen the new Huawei phone they put out to rival the iPhone 16 this week? It's the Mate XT, and what a phone it is, and what a price it is. Now, we can do a side-by-side comparison with the iPhone and its camera, and the compatibility and the speed. But there's one thing that you can't compare on these two phones. The physical design of the Mate XT takes us into another realm of smartphones, making the tablet obsolete. We've all seen the folding phone, which is a regular phone that opens up into a bigger phone. Well, this is a foldable triple screen smartphone. In other words, you guessed it, it's 3 super thin panels that open up into one screen. And how big is that screen? It's 10.2 inches. 2232 by 3184 resolution. Now, you can unfold it to 7.9 inches and still use it for simple tasks. But the thing I find so fascinating about this new technology is that when it's completely folded together, it's only 12.8 millimeters thick. Now, it does all the AI stuff and high performance and has 50 megapixel camera and a 5.5 periscope telephoto lens, but also includes a satellite communication link. So if you're in a remote area, you can still get a signal. And it comes with a kickstand case and wireless earbuds and car charger, and you can also add this foldable keyboard. But one thing it comes with that you may not like, its price. The 1 terabyte model comes in at around 188,000 pesos. So you want to be the first dude on the block to have a 10.2-inch foldable smartphone, you have to pay some big bucks. Right now, neither of these iPhones is available in the Philippines. Big surprise. But as we know, they'll start popping up soon. I expect to see them on the streets of Manila by Christmas. So start saving your pesos for a phone you probably don't need, but just have to have. This is DZRJ 810 AM on your radio dial. I'm LeCain. Time to rock it over to some science news. I guess by now everyone has heard of the Boeing Starliner. It's the spaceship that NASA chose to take 2 astronauts to the International Space Station back in June. Now, we also know that Boeing has been having some bad press over these past few years in which their general Earth planes have not been performing all that well. Things like door panels blowing off in mid-flight. But this was a mission into space, so it was assumed that every screw and bolt and wire and panel had been thoroughly checked. Well, before the launch, they noticed a small helium leak in the rocket. It wasn't that big a leak, so Mission Control said, never mind. Let's just go ahead with the launch. Now, helium is a gas that's used to push the propellant to the thruster systems used for maneuvering in space, which I'm sure you already knew that. Well, that little leak turned out to be not so little because 4 other leaks popped open and 28 of the ship's maneuvering thrusters cut out during the approach to the space station. Now, the crew of the Starliner was supposed to stay at the station for 8 days, June 5th to June 13th. Now, at first, NASA said the leaks posed no safety risk. that the flight back to Earth was only 7 hours, and there was enough helium for 70 hours of flight. But then NASA said, oh, wait a moment, let's move the flight up to July, just to be sure everything is okay. Actually, they wanted to figure out why all this happened in the first place, and if they came back now, the evidence would all burn up on re-entry. But the space agency stressed that the astronauts were not in any danger, and they are not stranded at the space station. After this, an expert made a statement that they made the right decision to go to the space station, because if they had have waited, it would have been so very expensive. That people need to understand it's never going to be exactly perfect every time. And to take the ship off the launch pad, remove the propulsion system, would have taken so long, would have been expensive, and they would have lost public and government support. But what they didn't expect was that the leak would worsen as the mission progressed. The problem then, of course, becoming if they had to delay the astronauts coming home even longer, that would become very embarrassing for Boeing, because it would come on the heels of some of their already extreme embarrassments. But what finally happened is the astronauts basically got bumped to another plane. They would hitch a ride on one of the SpaceX's Dragon rockets, but the problem with that was it wasn't coming until October. So basically the astronauts' missions went from 8 days to 5 months. But this week, they decided to go ahead and bring down the Starliner anyway without the crew. The ship can basically pilot itself all the way to Earth because, it doesn't really need a crew. So the ship came back last week, made a perfect landing in the dark desert of New Mexico. Supposedly, it made a bullseye landing as the parachute opened and it floated softly down to Earth. Well, actually, it turns out another thruster had malfunctioned during the re-entry, and there was a brief blackout of the guidance system. NASA said that even though the ship did land well, it feels that it made the right decision not to let the crew come aboard. This comes as Boeing argued that the ship may have had some issues, however, it was completely safe to come back to Earth with the astronauts in it. NASA stated again, it just wasn't worth the risk. Many have come forward to say that maybe Boeing should not be in the space flight business, just stick to regular airplanes. Cost of overruns and repairs and delays leading up to the flight were massive. And when is the next flight? And who wants to be the one to test it? Meanwhile, on the other side of NASA, they're getting ready to send another mission into space. The 𝗪cie𝗪𝗱 spacecraft will be available for launch sometime in October. Now, where exactly is it going? If you guessed Jupiter's moon Europa, then you would be right. This is an unmanned mission to that moon that many over the past decades believe could support life. Jupiter itself, the largest planet in our solar system, is not a good place to look for life because, like the sun, it is just made up of gases. There is no surface, but Europa is a very different story. It is completely covered with ice, but beneath that ice, there is an ocean of water. What scientists want to know is, what's in that water? As it turns out, sometimes plumes of water shoot out from the moon through the ice. What NASA wants to do is collect some of the water and see if it may have biological life in it, and maybe could support human life one day. But I guess the big question is, what about a planet that's already ready to go right now? It already has an ocean on the surface and a temperature that won't burn us alive or freeze us in a microsecond, or doesn't have so much radiation that we would not be able to stay anywhere but in a cave thousands of feet under the surface. Well, maybe astronomers have found such a planet. Could it be 𝗪cie𝗪𝗱? Could be that planet. First of all, it's about the same size as Earth, just a little bit bigger. That means a lot. Large planets tend to have no surface, but smaller to medium planets have a more rocky surface. This would put it at what's known as a habitable zone, which means you could land a ship on it and walk around without dying in a few seconds. And they believe that this planet has an ocean, which, even if it doesn't currently have life in it, it could possibly sustain, us. Anyway, the planet is in the neighborhood, kind of. It's, 137 light years from Earth. which doesn't seem so bad until you start looking at, say, traveling on the space shuttle. If we flew the space shuttle, it would take around 37,200 Earth years to go 1 light year. So if you left now, before you got 1,000th of the way, we might already have a ship that could pass you. And even then, it would still take hundreds of generations to get there. So for now, it's just something to think about, to dream about, and maybe make a movie about. But that's it. This is Eric LeCain here on The Jam on DZRJ and Radio Bandito TV. Now, let's get over to U.S. politics. Of course, the biggest news of the week has to be the U.S. presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. It is one of the most watched presidential debates in history. The numbers right now are somewhere around 67 million people tuned in. I mean, leading up to the debate, it was deemed the prosecutor versus the criminal. One candidate being a state prosecutor and the other one about to be sentenced on fraud charges and facing other multiple indictments. But the one thing that made this debate so unprecedented is that in previous debates, it's always been a white man versus a white man. Then recently, we had a white man versus a black man. And even more recently, we had a white man versus a white woman. And even more recently, we had an old white man versus an extremely old white man. But this was an old white man versus a much younger black Indian woman. And to be even more interesting, the polls show that both candidates are in a virtual tie. Now, I will not try to be somewhat nonpartisan and even Steven on how this debate went, but much like I tried in the debate between Biden and Trump. But everybody I have spoken to about this debate says Harris literally crushed Trump. Even the most hardcore Republican Trump supporters I know thought Harris won the debate. Actually, they said it wasn't so much that she won, but that Trump just had a very poor night. It all started out with the most awkward handshake ever in presidential debates. Usually the two candidates walk to the center and shake hands. However, Trump didn't shake hands with Biden in their debates. And in this debate, it didn't look like Trump had the plan to shake Harris's hand. However, she marched right over to him, to his podium, stuck out her hand, shook his hand, said, "I am Kamala Harris." Trump sort of had to shake her hand then. You know, according to the gambling sites, there was a category on whether they will shake hands, and the handshake was not an odds-on favorite to win. There was also a category on who would storm off the stage in the middle of the debate, and if a physical fight would break out, and neither of those happened. But anyway, Harris started the debate out by saying no matter what the question is, Trump will answer with his usual spiel about the border. This made Trump's answers difficult from the start because it seems that that was his game plan. Now, no matter what the question he tried to pivot to, the Mexican border and millions of thieves and rapists and mental patients coming over the country to steal black jobs was always his answer. The first question was about the economy, and Trump answered it as if he was answering a question about the border, just as she said he would. And from then on, the debate, Trump tripped over one trap after the other. Harris just seemed to know what buttons to press and when to push them. The problem was, she kept hitting Trump with his own words. She said world leaders were laughing at him and military leaders called him a disgrace and weak and wrong. Those are his best words. She stole Trump's best vocabulary and used it against him. She even said that he was fired in the election by 81 million people that voted for Biden. I mean, "you're fired" is Trump's biggest phrase. Now, Trump admitted a few days ago, before the debate, he actually had lost the previous election by a whisker. But when the moderator asked him to confirm what he said, he replied, "Oh, I didn't say that. It was all sarcastic." To which the moderator said, "Well, it didn't sound sarcastic. I mean, think about it. How could you make loss by a whisker sound sarcastic?" Which took us back to January 6th, when Trump sent his reporters to take over Congress. The moderators asked if there was anything Trump regretted about doing that. Trump asked, "Why are we focused on his supporters when dangerous illegals are coming in our country to hurt us?" And then started to refer to other protesters in other parts of the U.S. from years before. So the moderator asked again, Do you regret anything from January 6th? Trump said he had nothing to do with January 6th attack, that someone just asked him to make a speech, and then blamed the whole thing on Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House at that time. Harris pointed out that Trump was both indicted and waiting to stand trial and was impeached for his involvement in January 6th on that day. She then pointed out to other times in which Trump had connections with violent protests. And this led to one of the biggest takeaways, something that Harris kept saying: let's turn the page on this part of history. Let's not go back to what we had under Trump, but move forward and stand for democracy instead of attacking the country's foundation just because you don't like the outcome. She pointed that Trump had said that there will be a bloodbath if he is not elected this time. So in any case, Trump is still saying things that are not proven not to be true. It's like something I learned in high school about debating. Bait your opponent into saying something that isn't true and then point out that what they're saying is not true. Then you look at the moderators and you're like, come on, that's a lie. Can't let that one go. After the first 10 minutes of the debate, it seemed obvious that this was the strategy Harrison was taking. I think a couple of times Harris seemed surprised that Trump was walking so easily into her traps, to the point where he was interrupting himself when the subject of women's health care came up, a subject in which Trump is very proud of being the anti-abortion president. However, recently Trump has been changing his views daily on the subject because it's very unpopular in the U.S. So the moderator asked Trump, how can women trust you when we can't tell what your position really is because you keep changing it? Trump immediately went to his go-to answer, claiming Harris wants to have abortions in the 7th, 8th, 9th month, even abortions after birth, something called infanticide. And of course, that everyone in America wanted Roe overturned and sent back to the states. Moderators did make it clear that in all 50 states, there is no such practice as infanticide happening. And also, just to be clear, abortion in the U.S. after the 7th month is a fraction of 1% and mostly is only due to a complication in the pregnancy, and that 70% of Americans currently do not support the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Anyway, Harris, as you can imagine, jumped all over this, talking about a case in which a woman with a non-viable pregnancy had to sit in the parking lot of a hospital until she was crashing before they could even see her because the doctors were worried that they might be prosecuted. Harrison said, she's bleeding out in the car in a parking lot. She didn't want that. Her husband didn't want that. A 12-year-old, 13-year-old survivor of incest being forced to carry a pregnancy to term, they don't want that. This is where she used the word freedom, something Trump always says the Democrats are taking away from people. Harris pointed out that the most women in the U.S. want the freedom to choose what their health care can be. The big question came up of, will Trump sign a national abortion ban if Congress passes it? This came up because his vice presidential pick, J.D. Vance, said he wouldn't. Now, this is a huge issue among Trump's base. Most of his base is evangelical Christians. Trump smartly would not answer the question. It's a no-win either way for him, which Harris obviously knew. He basically said, I won't have to make that decision because the states will figure it out for themselves. Harris, of course, says that Trump will sign that bill if he comes up, which would be highly unpopular if he actually did sign it. But it would keep the right-wing Christians happy. So basically, the rest of the debate went in a similar direction. But one thing that stuck out was when Trump kept going after Biden, the current president, who he is no longer running against. He said, where is our president? We don't even know if he's the president. They threw him out of the campaign like a dog. We don't even know. Is he our president? We have a president that doesn't even know he's alive. So then Harris said, it's important to remind the former president, you're not running against Joe Biden. You are running against me. I'm sure she was waiting the whole debate to let that one out of the bag. Then Trump said, she is Biden, to which she clearly said, I am not Joe Biden, and I am certainly not Donald Trump. Which is still part of what Trump is having trouble with. He has called Harris dumb, stupid, doesn't know what she's doing. But in this debate, she knew exactly what she was doing. She was baiting Trump into saying exactly what she knew he would say and was ready to counter it every time he did. She knows Trump loves to talk about the huge crowds at his rallies. And lately, Harris has been drawing even larger crowds at hers, which irritates Trump to no end. She said that people should go to a Trump rally to see what it's really going on there. She said he will talk about the late, great Hannibal Lecter, which he does like to talk about him, even though he's a fictional character in a movie in which he eats people. He will say windmills will give you cancer, which so far there is no proof of that. But the real uppercut was when she said, watch all the people leaving early because they are just exhausted from his long rants and they are just plain bored. Now, she did this based on the number of videos of people walking out of the Trump speeches early, including those at the Republican National Convention. Trump got very rattled with this comment and fired back that he has the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. And no one goes to the Harris rallies except, of course, those that are paid to do so. But what Trump said after that is one of the most memorable parts of the debate. He pivoted back to the immigration and pointed out that in the town of Springfield, Ohio, Haitian immigrants are stealing people's dogs and cats from their homes and are eating them. Harris burst out into laughter and then looked at Trump like, are you okay, dude? The moderator jumped in and said they spoke to city officials and they said there's no proof that immigrants are eating people's pets. Trump even fired back saying, how can we trust what city officials are telling us? After all, I saw it on TV. But getting over to some of the more serious subjects, Trump said that while he was president, no wars happened and that leaders of other countries are afraid of him. This was during the question regarding whether Trump wants Ukraine to win the war or not. Of course, the U.S. during the Biden administration has supported Ukraine. However, Trump said that he would let Putin do whatever the hell he wanted. That's a Trump quote. However, in the debate, he would not answer if he wanted Ukraine to win, only that he wanted the war to stop. He said that if elected, he would stop the war before he even took the office. That Harris had met Putin already and that could not make a deal, and that millions and millions have died because of it, which is not actually true. I think 35,160 civilians, 120,000 Russian troops, 70,000 Ukrainian troops, not millions. Harris, who actually has never met Putin, said the way Trump would end the war is just to give up. She said Trump thinks he's a close friendship with Putin. However, he's a dictator who would eat Trump for lunch. Trump also claimed that Putin endorsed Harris for president, which Putin did as he smirked very sarcastically. Currently, the DOJ is in an investigation in which the Kremlin paid $10 million to have American YouTube host say flattering things about Russia and Trump. In the matter of Israel, they asked Harris about the fact that Israel was attacked by thousands of people died, that innocent Palestinians have died because of it. And since the Biden administration has not been able to solve the problem, how would she do it? Harris gave a very politically correct answer that Israel must be able to defend itself, but we must have a two-state solution, etc., etc. Trump fired back that even if he were president, that war would have never started ever in the first place. And that Trump, if Harris is elected, Israel will disappear. That she hates Israel. But in the next sentence, he said she hates the Arabs. And the whole place will get blown up if she is president. Anyway, what did we learn from this debate? Who won? And what difference would it even make? Polls after the debate came out after about 36 hours. Among 67%, they believe Harrison won, 33% who think Trump won. Another had it at 65-35 Harris and 63-37 Harris. These are the major polls, very easy to look up. But Trump came out right after the debate, like right after it was over in the spin room, said the polls had him winning 90% to 10, 88% to 12, and so on. Reporters asked Trump, what polls are you talking about, sir? Of course, he did not give an answer. There was also a poll among Republicans who said that after watching the debate, 1/3 said they would possibly reconsider supporting Trump. But there's one very sought after endorsement that came just after the debate. Taylor Swift came out to say she will vote for Kamala Harris. Big surprise. Now, there are some AI images that came out recently that Swift was voting for Trump, showing her fans wearing Swifties for Trump t-shirts, and one of Swift herself dressed up as Uncle Sam asking people to vote for Trump. But she has now debunked all of those. She said, as a voter, I want to make sure I watch and read everything I can about the proposed policies to be very transparent about my actual plans for the election as a voter. She also made a reference to Tim Walz, the VP pick, who is an advocate of IVF for women's rights and women's rights to choose what they want for their own body and LGBTQ rights. Then she signed it, childless cat lady, poking fun at J.D. Vance, who is the Trump VP pick, who said childless cat ladies are taking over the country. There was a picture of Swift holding the cat. So, if you were wondering if a pop star's endorsement has any meaning, well, it got 9 million likes just after it was posted, and 337,826 visited the vote.gov site from Swift's Instagram site. But is any of this going to have any effect on the election at all? Every group that measures who won the debate says Harris clearly won the debate and Trump clearly lost the debate. However, looking back, Bush clearly lost the debate and won the election. Well, kinda. Obama clearly lost his second debate and then won by a huge margin. So even if Harris won the debate, they are still, by most polls, tied. The Harris campaign immediately challenged Trump to a second debate, but Trump said, why should I debate her again? When you're a loser, of course, you want to debate again. Honestly, I don't think Trump wants to go through that again, but who knows? The question now is, what's next? Well, I'll give you a clue. This week, Trump is going to say or do something outrageous. Just wait. And every news company will be forced to cover it, and we will forget entirely about this debate. So by the next show, we will definitely have more U.S. politics to discuss about the election. Until then, this is 𝗪cie𝗿𝗀 at the World News Jam. Thank you for joining us today for our discussions on the news from around the world. So for all of us here at Radio Bandito TV and DZRJ, everyone stay safe out there, and we will see you next time.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.